Welcome to the Rogue Trader podcast, a podcast that's loosely named in my honor. Not a name or not my name, but a description that is often used when people think about me. So my name is Nick Leeson. I will always be remembered for the collapse of Barings Bank in 1995, the loss of £862 million, and the collapse of a 233-year-old organisation. I've been associated with the financial markets. I use the word associated very loosely for about 40 years. I think between the people that are joining me on the podcast, we probably have about 120 years worth of experience of the financial markets in various different forms. My co-hosts, you can see there are three of those on your screen today. We're going to be looking at a podcast that's going to be loosely themed around financial scandal, the people involved in those, some of the scams that we're seeing in the world of finance these days as well, and looking to interview people with those sort of stories very much in mind. There will always be two of us that are taking on the interview on that particular subject. We all have different skill sets. All of the co-hosts are experts in their field. And we look forward to bringing you a podcast that's very entertaining, has good content, is engaging and equally informative as well. So I'm going to start by introducing my co-hosts. I've known them all for a number of years, some of them a lot longer than others. But I think what I've managed to do is bring some of the most interesting people from my time in the financial markets to this podcast. And we look forward to sharing our time with you. So the first person I'm going to introduce is Jason Sen. Jason and I go back probably about 35 years on and off. Like I said, we've both been in the financial markets for 40 years. Jason far more successfully than me. I think he produces some of the best analysis that you'll ever see in the markets. He worked on the trading floors. Life in particular, many years ago, he managed that transition from trading floor to trading on the screens very, very successfully. And as I've said, he's provided extensive market analysis for the last number of years as well. He's, as you can see, we're all joining on different forms of devices today, so the production values will improve as we move forward. Jason is in Thailand. It's my pleasure to introduce him. I think we probably met maybe 35 years ago. I think it was in Covent Garden, maybe at TGI. I was back in the UK. Yeah, it sounds strange, doesn't it? I know there's a few of my co-hosts sniggering at that one, but I was back in the UK for a short period of time. It was a Barings Christmas party, and I was on my way to Stringfellows. That's where the Christmas party was. I'm not sure why. There wasn't anything else going on that particular evening. It was just being hired out as a venue, but it was in Stringfellows. So, you know, Barings has a lot to answer for as well. But Jason, you're not going to know this, but Jason starred in the movie Rogue Trader. I use the word starred. He may have a different description of it, but he has one advantage over me. He met Ewan McGregor. I never did. So let's hear from Jason anyway. And Jason, if you just give a bit of an introduction to yourself, and maybe we'll talk about a market afterwards.
Well, I didn't star in the movie, but I did appear in it as an extra in the trading pits because I looked like I could be Singaporean and they needed someone who understood the hand signals. I actually, because I'm so short, they had to put me on a box in the pit so the camera could find my face. But I did meet Ewan McGregor. He was very nice indeed.
Yeah, I often get asked how lifelike his portrayal of me was. You know, I suppose one of the things that I always joke about when I'm talking at events these days, or how I start a lot of those events, is by apologising for the fact that I look nothing like him. But you know, somehow they cast him as me. I don't know how they did that, but. Just give us a little bit of background about yourself, Jason.
Okay, I started on the floor of the London Stock Exchange in 1987 when I was 19 years old, in the derivatives corner of the stock exchange. So I was in derivatives for about 15 years. A few years later, early 90s, I moved over to the London International Financial Futures Exchange as an options market maker, great fun, and the open outcry markets, of course, as you well know. And then I managed to survive that period through to the end of the 90s when the life floor, the London International Financial Futures Exchange, closed. And then we all had to transition, as you mentioned earlier, into screen trading, which wasn't easy. But actually, for options, it was possibly easier, because instead of having to calculate all the Greeks, the gammas, the thetas, and the deltas in my head when I traded, it was all done for me on a screen, which was amazing to have all this all calculated in. I could work out my hedge immediately. Anyway, that was the transition, and then I moved on to trading Forex and learning technical analysis about 20 years ago. And then I provide technical analysis based advice and signals on a daily basis these days.
Okay. One of the things I've been looking at over the last couple of days is Bitcoin. Extremely volatile the last couple of days. It's traded up to 102,000, back down to 96, and is fluctuating in that sort of range. But some of the research I'm looking at is talking about a line of death. Bitcoin may be getting up to around that 110,000 mark, and then falling back from those levels, but falling back significantly. Do you have any thoughts on where Bitcoin's going to go?
From a purely technical perspective, and that's the way I work, just looking at the charts, we're in a consolidation. We've been going basically sideways since the 21st of November. So we've been up a bit, we've been down a bit, we're kind of holding in the 90s. There isn't any particular pattern that suggests that the market's going to drop significantly, although I could argue there's a head and shoulders pattern. A head and shoulders pattern is when you get a peak followed by a higher peak, but then the next peak is lower than the previous peak, and that indicates a trend change. Now, we would need to break below 91,000 for that pattern to be confirmed. So at the moment, it's not relevant. But if we broke below 91,000, I would be concerned about a move to the downside, and it could be quite significant. I mean, 70,000 is not out of the question if that were to happen.
Right, and it's getting close to that 91,000 level all of the time. It's picked back up a little bit today, but we'll bring more of that sort of analysis over the weeks. I think Jason and I will also be inviting some of our friends from the trading area to come in and share their views and their own experiences and their own careers, and we'll look at that a little bit more in depth, and we'll certainly have a market segment to the podcast moving forward. Thanks for that, Jason. We'll move on to the other hosts now.
Thanks so much, guys.
So the second co-host that you'll be seeing over the next few weeks and months is Seth Freedman. Seth and I have known each other for a number of years now. We've worked together on a couple of corporate frauds. We've worked together on a couple of scams as well that have affected individuals to quite an extreme degree, and we're still pursuing a number of those cases. Seth worked for a period of time in the city as a broker. He's had various other experiences as well that I'll let him explain to you. He brings a wealth of experience. I think one of the things that we're looking to achieve over the next few weeks and months is that none of us are afraid of asking difficult questions. I think back to my time at Barings between 92 and 95, I was never asked a difficult question. And some people are very reluctant to do it. You're not going to see that with any of our hosts. All of them are prepared to ask the difficult questions and really get to the core of what went on in some of these episodes that we're going to explore, really understand the psychology of the person. I've been there, seen that and done it. And we'll really get to the essence of what went on in each and every one of those episodes. So Seth, if you could just give us a few words, a potted history of yourself, that would be great.
No, sure. Thank you. So my name's Seth Freedman, and I've, for the last 10 years, have worked in corporate intelligence, which generally means working for some of the world's biggest oligarchs and business tycoons and so on, most notoriously for Harvey Weinstein when he, ahead of his arrest and subsequent jailing for various assaults in Hollywood. But the common theme has been working for people who are at the top of their industry and usually are bringing cases against their perceived enemies or are defending cases where they're under attack. I worked in the city for 6 years from leaving school until I was 24, when I went off and joined the Israeli army in a combat unit for 1.5 years, and subsequently ended up as a journalist from Israel, writing for The Guardian, but always with one eye on the city, writing about politics, but also finance. And I eventually went back to the commodities market and became embroiled in a massive whistleblowing scandal to do with the gas and energy markets, which led to Parliament being convened in urgent sessions with David Cameron. And it really rocked the whole commodities industry, wider than just energy. But my experiences there and the shocking lack of protections for whistleblowers and the way that the regulators turned a blind eye, the collusion of politicians and various big companies involved in energy trading, happened to lead me into corporate intelligence, which is where I've worked ever since.
Okay, well, that's great, because that whole subject of whistleblowing is something that I know Oonagh knows a lot about. We also have Tom Harding coming on the program in one of the weeks ahead of us. Tom was an FBI informant. He was a fund analyst or a fund manager with one of the funds one of the biggest funds in the US, but ultimately, I suppose, became a whistleblower, avoided jail on the back of his agreement with the FBI at the time, and we'll look in and we'll understand his story with a lot more detail. Oonagh, just on that subject of whistleblowers, before we introduce you, but it's a subject you know well, as with your compliance and risk management background, and some of the strange things that are going on in that space at the moment.
Yeah, it's incredible. The US really has differentiated themselves globally in that they award between 10 to 30% of basically the successful monies that are obtained following successful prosecution. What that means is that an individual can actually be involved in the fraudulent activity or illicit activity themselves, but then they will get awarded potentially up to 30%. And we saw last year one individual getting awarded $24 million US. Those individuals in some instances still go to jail, but when they leave jail, they have a nice little kind of, should we say, slush fund to play with. So it's really changed the game in terms of insider, in any type of fraud, whether it's insider dealing, whether it's any type of financial crime or illicit activity. Whether you're part of it or not part of it, there is now a financial benefit to whistleblowing, but that can't be said true for other jurisdictions such as the UK. And to Seth's point on whistleblowing, it can be detrimental to individuals in that it is career destroying. And I've met many people in the city over the years, not just in London, but my time in Singapore, my time in Hong Kong, whose careers, and also in the UAE, whose careers and families have been destroyed as a result of whistleblowing, where these individuals did it for the right reasons and weren't involved. So some whistleblowing is something I'm very, very focused on. We need to do much more to protect whistleblowers. There's a number of organizations in the UK. And again, there's a number of people we're going to bring onto this podcast who have been involved in these types of whistleblowing situations, and kind of really get to see the reality of what that has meant as a repercussion to them. And it's going to be really interesting to see the US versus everybody else dynamic.
Great. It sounds like I missed the trick. I should have been my own whistleblower. I could have gone to prison for 4.5 years and come out with a bag full of money instead of the empty pockets that I did.
Well, remember, it could have been up to 30%. That would have been a big bag of money, Nick.
Oh, I wouldn't be doing the podcast now anyway. No, so as you've heard already from the comments there, Oonagh is a very experienced risk, compliance, governance specialist. As she said, a particular interest with whistleblowing, but I know that you're very prominent in the cryptocurrency space as well. Won any number of awards for your work in those areas. So if you could just give us a potted history of yourself and perhaps maybe give us some insight into some of the scams that you're seeing going on at the moment, not necessarily corporate ones, more the individuals. I know there's a couple of interesting things that you're looking at.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, first and foremost, Nick, for that kind introduction. I've been in the industry now just over 20 years. Luckily, the Botox helps a lot. I'm a lot older than I look. Um, in my time, I have seen a complete transformation. I came into the city, pre 2007, where, we still had that real old city mentality, which I have to say I miss. I really, really do miss that. We saw a big change during 2007, 2008, where risk controls were implemented overnight, and it really impacted how we could operate. That also meant a lot of changes in accountability as well, and ownership of risk within organizations, which took many years to actually fall into place, if indeed it actually has to this day. Um, I've had the luxury of spending 6 years in Singapore, 6 years in Hong Kong working. I've also worked in the Middle East. So I've been able to see a real spectrum of not just regulatory environments, but also enforcement. And on that, I've worked on various cases. I've worked with an ING on the back of their OFAC enforcement, HSBC on the back of their SEC enforcement. So I've been able to see firsthand how these cases are not just managed, but what that means internally, and how we're now beginning to identify through the use of technology a lot more risk in our book than we ever saw before. So, Jason will talk to it obviously about how technology transformed, the trading floor.
Yeah.
But from a risk perspective, a really good statistic was, last year, about 18 months ago, HSBC, and they publicly talked about this, introduced a new AI algorithm into understanding illicit activities. They found complex networks in their books that they never knew existed. And the problem is a lot of these activities we can't see with the human eye. So that implementation and use case of AI in financial crime in particular has been a massive eye opener. What has also happened, however, is that the criminals, as you're well aware, Nick, we've worked on a few cases.
You're calling me a criminal, Oonagh?
No, I'm talking about the people we've worked with, Nick. You're a reformed character, and I love working with you. So what have we've seen is don't be fooled to thinking that if the banks are implementing these tools, that the banks have an advantage. Of course not. We will always be 1 or 2 steps behind in our ability to look at financial crime typologies because they're continually evolving. But the criminals have the access to the same tools that we do. So the same sanction screening systems, the same name screening systems, the same AI tools, deep fake. We saw a recent example in Hong Kong where a new CFO, Chief Financial Officer, joined a company. First couple of weeks on the job, they were invited to a meeting with all of the senior executives, instructed to transfer monies. I think it was something over 20 million US dollars. And they did that on the back of the authorization of the CEO, etc., who were on the call. It then transpired afterwards that everybody, bar the CFO, was deepfake, which is just shocking. And that's, to your question, Nick, on the financial crime typologies we are seeing everything and things that you wouldn't believe. A lot of them involve the modification of voices, where individuals are called to say that by a son or a daughter or a grandmother saying that they've been arrested or they urgently need money. People are depositing money. There's many movies on it as well out there at the moment. And don't be fooled into thinking that these are just Hollywood productions. This is what's happening today on the street. Even today, I use Parrot, which is a recording tool, but they also have deep fakes. I can transform myself into any celebrity, Kim Kardashian, you name it. And, maybe I should probably get more money doing that. But the truth of the matter is the technology that's now being used is just phenomenal. And there's a lot of financial crime scams that are happening today, which the authorities can't shut down. A perfect example is on the border of Cambodia and Thailand, where we're seeing a number of these, should I say, romance scam centers being set up, where people are applying for jobs with the likes of Deloitte, Uber, Facebook, being flown into Bangkok for an interview, or they've successfully got the job. They were given the money for their travel. They get to the airport, and next thing they know, they've been kidnapped and they're being forced And I say forced, these individuals are being taken forcibly, electrocuted, forced labor to commit these crimes.
Yeah.
So the big change we're seeing nowadays as well is the perpetrators of the crimes are actually victims themselves who are being forced into kind of modern day slavery. So there is a massive situation on our hands at the moment, and I'm quite excited. And I say excited this year. The UK introduced this APP payback scheme last year, where victims who were involved in romance scams, investment scams, can actually reclaim monies through their banks where their banks fail to detect them. What we've seen is the bank's controls are very poor, to say the least. But what we're going to see this year is a massive influx of cases, which are going to show us brand new typologies that we never knew. And why is that? Well, previously, somewhere between 50 to 20% of these scams were being reported. Various reasons why they weren't: shame, embarrassment. Can we really get the money back? But now we have this scheme. There is some light at the end of the tunnel. So 2025 is going to be a massive year for financial scam typologies. One of the other things that we've been looking at recently is a great example is in the football arena. A lot of young kids who are going through into kind of academies, and if they're not successful in making it into the first team or into one of the kind of the junior teams, they're dropped. And one of the things that people never really think about is what then happens to these individuals. What we found recently is a lot of these individuals, in particular for Portugal, are being trafficked to the Middle East with offers of training contracts out in the Middle East. And when they get there, they're actually forced into basically modern day slavery, sometimes even sexual trafficking. So there is a lot of serious issues that need to be discussed, and they need to come to the forefront of what can we better do to educate and support, because vulnerable people are being exposed to these crimes and we're not doing enough to help with the awareness.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that, really strikes a chord with me, both with the work that I've done with Seth and yourself over the last number of years. People aren't speaking up enough.
Yep.
There isn't enough knowledge. There isn't enough education around the subject. And you've got that whole embarrassment factor as well, where people have been scammed and they don't want to talk about it. They prefer to ignore it. I think one of the, and some of those episodes have been are quite harrowing in terms of the way that people have been treated. I think the football story and the way that people are being tricked by, I suppose, what become fake agents in that type of field is going to be interesting. We have Paul Stewart, who's an ex-professional footballer who he played for Man City, Liverpool, Blackpool and Tottenham Hotspur. He's coming onto the programme one week to talk about safety and security around those younger individuals that are going through those instances. And when you told me the story, I was flabbergasted, really. And it'll be great if we can bring some of those stories to the fore, because everybody's suffering. And what you tend to find is people suffer in silence, and hopefully we can overcome some of that and look at the whistleblowing side of it. I know that you have a big interest in crypto as well, so we'll look at some of the scandals that have gone on in that area as well, and get really behind the psychology of some of these, which I know that both you and Seth are an expert in doing. I look forward to it. It's going to be good.
I'm actually really excited about it, and also really excited working with the both of you. Seth's stories always they become dinner antidotes afterwards. It's like, did you hear about this? Oh my goodness. So if anything, I'm going to have more stories for dinner out of all of this.
That's it. All right. Well, look, thank you very much. That's an introduction to the people who are going to be taking you forward on this journey with the Rogue Trader podcast, and we look forward to seeing you all again soon.